thank you everyone for joining us today for Strides. I'm Addie, your hostess, and today we have with us Mr. Nico Meyering.
Hi.
Thank you for joining us. So I'll jump right into our questions. To begin, if you could just please give us a little bit of your background. For instance, where you grew up, where you're currently located, anything you'd like to share about your career, and anything you feel comfortable sharing about your disability.
Of course. Addie, thank you so much for having me on Strides. This is a real honor. Hi, everyone. I'm Nico Meyering. I use he, him pronouns. For a visual description, I'm a white man with blue and brown glasses, short blonde hair, a green sweater, and a brown cardigan. I'm seated in front of a bookcase. So I actually grew up in rural New York, way upstate, but right now I live in Philadelphia. I have a day job in the tech sector, but my real passion, like my civic career, right, that's disability rights. I'm actually a second generation disability advocate, and here's what I mean by that. So I'm actually following in the footsteps of my own mom, who decided to keep me right against medical advice, and who began to organize other families whose kids had my disability. Back in the late 80s, it was very scary if your kid came out and they weren't breathing on their own right away, if there was something immediately and obviously wrong with them. A very scary time. But once I got medically stable, the medical care team came to my parents and they said, Nico's going to have a very difficult life ahead of him. He's going to need lots of medical intervention. He's going to need lots of medical help. And as a result of that, if you want to give him up for adoption, if you want to put him in the foster care system, we'll support you in that. And then you can try again for a normal kid, maybe a year or 2 years down the line. And my parents were like, thanks, but no thanks. We're gonna stick with the kid we have. And I'm very thankful that they did that. So my mom immediately began looking for other people whose babies had these symptoms. We got a diagnosis of congenital central hypoventilation syndrome, or CCHS. CCHS is really rare. We're a very rare disease population. And that means that we're always educating our doctors, our nurses, our teachers, and our family members about what our care needs are, what our diagnosis is, and what our symptoms are. So, with about 2,000 cases globally, the onus is always on us to expand that knowledge base and to be our own best advocates. Now, CCHS is a lifelong and genetic condition. It is manageable, and people with CCHS can do, I'm going to estimate 98% of anything anyone else can, whether anyone else is disabled or non-disabled. People with CCHS will tend to have a very suppressed automatic impulse to breathe, or they'll have no automatic impulse to breathe. And that's dangerous, right? And that reason that's dangerous is that breathing is a kind of an important life function, right? If you're not breathing regularly, then odds are you're not going to be alive for very long. So when we're asleep, when we're sick, we need mechanical ventilation. A lot of times when a new baby is born and is born with CCHS, babies need to have a tracheotomy. Unfortunately, babies don't really have a set sleep schedule. Babies fall asleep all the time. So we do see a lot of CCHS babies getting trachs and being vented through those tracheotomies for their first few years of life. When the kid gets a bit older and is able to give input about what they want their life to be like, what they want, their venting needs to look like as they age, then we can see kids get more involved with maybe like face masks, like you would see for sleep apnea or on BiPAP machines, or increasingly we see people go for diaphragm nerve pacers, and that's a surgical intervention, right, where devices are placed on your diaphragm that, when activated, shock your diaphragm into expanding and contracting. So that makes you breathe by electrical impulse. What we really want to emphasize is that however you choose to be vented throughout your life, that's totally okay. I myself decided to kind of transition away from a trach when I was about age 6 or age 7, and I was more interested in face venting or getting a face mask to vent me through a BiPAP machine. If you know anybody who might have sleep apnea, who might use a CPAP machine, a BiPAP machine looks really similar to that, right? The only difference is that BiPAP is a little more involved than CPAP. It has an inspiratory pressure for when you breathe in and an expiratory pressure for when you breathe out. So those machines can change how frequently I inhale and exhale and how deeply I inhale and exhale as well. Um, so that's like classic CCHS. That's the classic symptom. But CCHS, as I covered, is genetic and it impacts your nervous system. The human nervous system is very tricky and very complex, and it has a little bit of influence in a lot of things that our bodies do. Our heart rate, how we sweat, how we adjust to temperature, um, even our vision is also impacted by CCHS, right? So a lot of us do have glasses. Obviously, I'm wearing glasses right now, and I probably will for my entire life. I do have some cardiac issues, but like a lot of people with CCHS, those issues are kept in check by a cardiac pacemaker. So, I do have this very rare medical condition that can be life threatening. And yes, that's scary. And yes, that's dangerous. And yes, it will take more work and more care throughout my life. But I'm also very lucky. And I'm lucky for a reason, for the reasons that, my parents gave me the resources and care that I needed to flourish. I'm lucky in that, I do have friends and colleagues with CCHS, and I never had to grow up alone. I always got good medical care. I always got good social care. And I'm very lucky in that way. So that's a little bit about, where I live, where I've been living, my condition, and how we manage that condition.
Right. So just so you know, I just got a major crash educational course because I never heard of your condition. Like seriously, never
Sure,
heard it.
sure.
Which, as you said, is not uncommon because it's quite rare.
Yeah,
But that said, you mentioned that professionally you work in the tech industry, and your passion is, of course, using those skills for disability advocacy. But can I ask, what sort of drew you towards the tech industry and then, of course, the disability civil side of it? You mentioned your mom. So did
yeah.
you just decide to take after her, or did she have to encourage you, or how did that kind of happen? Because not everybody that has a disability chooses to go into an advocacy field, which is why I always
Yeah,
ask this question.
that's right. So I want to make it clear that, like you say, disabled people do not have to become disability advocates. The only thing that disabled people need to do is exercise complete control and independence over their own lives, or as much independence, as much control as is feasible and as is reasonable, right? I guess what got me started in disability advocacy is that as I was developing into throughout childhood, as I developed, I saw firsthand how important it was to be part of the disability community and how membership in that disability community does have benefits. It gives you resources, supports a support system of friends and colleagues, doctors that know about your condition, and resources, right? Medical knowledge, social knowledge, and practice and resources in what was most important to me as a young kid, explaining to my classmates, why I was different, why I had a trach and they didn't, why they could be a bit more rambunctious on the playground and I could not, um, and things like that, right? The 90s were before the internet, which meant that to have a widespread reach, my parents had to use a lot of uh, phone activity, had to send things out in the mail. And that's really where I started kind of getting my feet wet. I would help my mom and my dad staple like monthly or quarterly newsletters. And then I would help them send out these newsletters to other CCHS families all over the nation. Right. And we occasionally also got to meet up with other CCHS families at conferences in the US, and that was usually in like sunnier areas, right? We needed a good reason for families to join us. So being in Florida, being in California, being in warm areas or sunny areas, that was like the draw, the lure to bring more families in to share in our fellowship, to share experiences, share resources, and share encouragement and advice. It's 2023 now, so that same organization is still in operation, but it looks different, right? It looks differently in how we interact with each other. It looks differently in the services and events that we offer our members, and our leadership also looks a bit different. We've got more people active in that organization that have CCHS, not just parents of people with CCHS. We do still meet up for conferences, and those conferences have only grown in number in every year that we've held the conference. So we're reaching, first maybe 10 attendees, then 20, then 50, and now we're in the hundreds of attendees. Um, what encouraged me to get involved more in disability advocacy is that I reached a point in my life where my formal schooling was done. I had my graduate degree, and I realized that if I wanted that same level of help and those same resources and organizations to be there for the next generation, I needed to do the work, and people in my generation had to do the work to make sure that those resources, that those groups would still be there, right? We can't just trust that the next generation is going to have those same helps, those same assistances that we did, right? Um, we need to build the future that we want to see, and we need to build the future that we want to live in. And ultimately, that's what helped me get involved in CCHS advocacy first, and then into rare disease advocacy after I joined the board of the CCHS network and I kind of got my feet wet in board governance. And now I'm doing this disability wide, right? So I'm currently a member of the Philadelphia Mayor's Commission for people with disabilities, and I feel very honored to do that work. I'm honored to do this work because over 15% of people in Philadelphia have a disability. And that's a lot higher than the number we see in New York City, for example, or in other major East Coast cities. Philadelphia has a much bigger number of disabled residents, and we're also one of the poorer major cities in the US. So that's a very unique challenge to us. I'm also honored to have been inducted into the National Disability Mentoring Hall of Fame. As I've spoken about with you, Addie, mentoring the next generation of disabled leaders is incredibly important. I don't know about you, Addie. Maybe you had a similar experience, but when I was growing up, I didn't really see other disabled role models. I didn't see other disabled adults who were leaders in their community. So I really want to be that be that example for the next generation, and I also want to help other people be that example, right? I'm aware that outside of my disability, I do have a lot of privileges, a lot of resources, a lot of really beneficial circumstances that other disabled people might not have. So we need to level the playing field. We need to democratize access and democratize disability advocacy so that advocacy is seen as something that all disabled people can do wherever they are, wherever in their like disabled journey they are, and in whatever sector they're in. What interested me about getting into the tech sector was that in doing a lot of this disability advocacy, I found myself gaining project management skills like running meetings, running events, keeping projects on task and on time, managing budgets, uh, planning events, and maintaining clear lines of communication so that you can collaborate with anyone you need to collaborate with to get the job done. And I realized that those skills that served me so well in disability advocacy could also serve me really well in the professional world. I moved to Philadelphia in 2018 and I spent 4 years working for the University of Pennsylvania, where I did grant administration for orphan disease research grants. So orphan diseases are diseases like CCHS that are incredibly rare, that don't have lots of research done, don't have lots of treatment options, and which present a big burden on families. There is a knowledge burden. You have to learn a lot. You have to learn a lot very quickly, and also a financial burden, right? You need to pay a lot of money so that your kids can have the support that they need to flourish in life. Um, and after 4 years there, I wasn't really satisfied with my financial compensation. I was wanting to also stretch my wings in more project management ways and to build my skills. So I made the jump into the tech sector, and it's been a really wonderful choice so far.
Um, to kind of switch gears here for a moment, you're obviously very dedicated and very involved
Thank you.
in your career. That said, none of us, no matter how dedicated, can work 24/7. So when you're not working, what do you find that you like to do as hobbies? We all need to let go of, work a little bit each day. So what do you find that you do to help switch your brain off, so to speak?
Thanks, Addie. This is a really good question. So, one thing you just said to me is that nobody, nowhere can do disability advocacy 24/7. And this is true. I know it's true because I've tried to be that guy that goes 24/7 and it's not really possible. Um, when I'm not, doing disability work, which can be tough at times, right? Sometimes, I have to get dragged from my chair and I'm shouting, no, just one more email, or no, just let me send this message. But when I'm, not at the computer doing this work, uh, I really love going out for trivia nights. I'm getting really big into those. Um, you know, Accumulating knowledge is something that was seen in my family as an asset and as an admirable trait. And who knows, maybe my love of trivia will one day pay off. I'll go on Jeopardy or I'll go on Wheel of Fortune or another game show and I'll make like $20,000 in one night, which is like not bad for a few hours of work, right? I loved, as a kid, I loved playing basketball. And now as an adult, I realize that the NBA is not in my future, but I love watching basketball games. A big Sixers fan. I'll watch the playoffs too when the NBA playoffs roll around every spring. I love reading. I'm a very voracious reader, and I read like maybe 100 books a year. I'm a huge history buff. I majored in history in college, and I originally thought I was going to be a high school history teacher. Unfortunately, that didn't really work out for me. But history is a wonderful teacher for us because when we look at the struggles of disabled people throughout history, we learn kind of how they overcame their struggles or at least circumvented their struggles. And it gives us clues about how we can navigate our own challenges in the 2020s and beyond. I'm actually giving a talk on disability history next Tuesday evening, where we'll talk about kind of how disability was seen in Revolutionary War era US. Um, and finally, I'm a huge like sci-fi and fantasy nerd. I read comics. I watch all those trashy superhero movies. Anything where someone comes to save the day, I generally like it, right? The real world is complicated and things aren't always, black and white. Things are always just, more varying grade degrees of gray. So it's nice to just watch a TV show where things, are black and white and where people occasionally dress up in colorful costumes to solve things with their fists.
Um, we only have just a few minutes left. There are two more questions that I'd like to go over.
Okay.
The first one is, with all you've said about what you do in your career and the hard work that it takes and that sort of thing, what advice would you give to someone else with a disability who may just be, considering what they want to do for a career and think that, something like disability advocacy and social work may be a good idea for them?
Sure. So there's no one way to be a disability advocate. You can always start your advocacy career by advocating for yourself. Nobody is going to live your life except you. Other people are very important, like your parents, your life partner, your friends, but ultimately, only you decide what you want your life to be like, right? You can advocate for what you want, you can advocate for what you need, and you should feel empowered to do that. If you think that maybe disability advocacy is something that you want to get into on a more community wide basis, then start where you are. Every state should have a national council on independent living, which will help disabled people live independently or live in community as much as possible. These same organizations can help connect you to job readiness training or any other job prep programs that you could benefit from. Even something like making a resume or reading over a resume can be a service that they offer. You can take a look into your local government. Does your city have a commission for people with disabilities? Could you get involved on another commission? Because here's a secret, right, that I've learned. Disability issues are human issues. Disability issues are community issues. There is a disabled perspective that you can bring to every issue facing your community, even if that's something as simple as keep your sidewalks clean. If we don't have clean sidewalks, how do people who use wheelchairs get around? How do people who use walkers or other mobility aids get around? If you want to focus on educational equity, well, there are plenty of ways to help disability inclusion grow in the classroom. And there's lots of disabled people, even throughout history, who have taken jobs as teachers, as classroom aides, or as assistants in the educational sector. Start where you are, do what you can, learn from previous generations, and never stop improving.
That's very good. And with that bit of advice, let me just ask you: is there anything you would like to add that we haven't already covered?
Sure. So, if I could say one thing to people out there living with rare diseases, because tomorrow is actually Rare Disease Day, it's that you know yourself best. You know your disability best. You need to speak up for the things that you need. No one else is going to speak up for you as well as you can. right, is very scary. Of course it is. It's always scary the first or second or 11th or 111th time that you speak up and advocate for yourself, or you speak up and you advocate for your community. But you are not alone. You have the disability community behind you. Over 20% of Americans who have reached age 18 are living with a disability. And the fact of the matter is, unless you pass away at the height of your health, then odds are that you will encounter disability at some point in your lifetime. So disabled rights are human rights. Never feel bad about speaking up for yourself. Never feel bad for asking for the things that you need, because odds are someone else, somewhere else, are going to need those things too. The trail that you blaze for yourself is a trail that will be used by other people in the coming weeks, months, and years. I'm still learning from trails blazed by my mom, who is still learning from trails blazed by her family, who is probably still learning from trails blazed, from their ancestors when they came over from the Netherlands. So there's some perspective for you. And that's what I would want to say to anyone disabled.
In other words, we're basically living history.
We are living history. History starts with us, but it doesn't stop there.
Exactly. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today for Strides. Thank you to our guests for joining us. And remember, everyone, that disability comes with ability.